Hey everyone, this is Chess Coach Aaron, and here is another video with the King's Indian series. So there are quite a few kind of choices that white can do when you start using your King's Indian setup. But for the most part, you can use the same ideas as black against most of what white does. We're going to look at some choices in a different video series here. This one will be on move 5. White is going to do a little move F3. And F3, when you play the King's Indian, on move 5 is called the Saemisch variation. Saemisch was a really good player, I think from the 1920s and 30s, maybe around that time period. And he really liked the little move F3 for white in quite a few openings, actually. And notice, we've done 4 moves. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're talking about move number 5, and white has a lot of setups. Here, Saemisch would play F3, and it's got some interesting reasons to play it real quick. So let's just explain it real quick what the ideas are for white, and what the white's trying to do and why. We'll flip the board, pretend we're white for a moment, though we're going to play the King's Indian, obviously, as black. But white is playing F3 for a couple reasons. It's kind of slow, but it's very solid. Sometimes E4 can be a weak point. All right, so that's number 1. So this does kind of support it right away. But number 2, black could get a lot of counterplay with either bishop to G4 sometimes. If the knight comes out, you can just trade that bishop off for the knight early on, sure. And also the knight on F6 many times can go to G4 in many lines, especially if white tries to get aggressive. Also can back up when needed, so it doesn't have to necessarily go to G4, but F3 takes away a lot of these ideas. But that's not the only reason why white is playing F3. They're not just trying to take away some of black's possible ideas later. The truth is they want to play an early bishop E3, then play queen D2 and set up this battery. And then, once the battery is set up, perhaps play bishop H6, trading away this dark squared bishop for black, what I call the dragon bishop. Probably the most important piece for a long time for black until the middle part of the game. Sometimes this bishop, the dark squared bishop, actually starts to become a little trapped and weak after we play E5. And then I don't mind the trade at all. If anything, as black, I welcome it. But early on, this is white's idea. Get the bishop on H6, maybe run up with Harry to H-pawn, open up a line for the rook, make this trade, maybe get the queen in. I call this the caveman attack. And the caveman attack can work against a lot of openings. A lot of openings that black does the dragon bishop. And there's too many of them to name, but it's quite a few. The number 1 being the dragon Sicilian, of course. So this is the idea. They want to play bishop E3, but they want the bishop to be safe. When white plays an early bishop E3, many times black can now play knight G4. It's protected because we've played D6, and they can annoy or attack this bishop. Bishop tries to run G5. We say, get out of here, bishop. Bishop goes to F4. At the right time, we can actually get a double attack. Notice the knight also protects over here. So this is annoying to white. They want this bishop to get to H6 and trade for the dark square bishop. They don't want to trade it for the knight, and they don't want it to run around. So, in order to prevent this, many times you can play F3, then bishop E3, then queen D2. And this type of opening structure can be very solid for white, and it allows queenside castling, since all the queenside pieces have moved early. So this fits right into the plan. They don't have to castle queenside or long. There are some players that still play castling short here, but then they don't run up with Harry to H-pawn. But by casting long and running up with Harry to H-pawn and bishop H6, they're trying to do the caveman attack. But it's kind of slow, and as black, you should be ready for it. So let's flip it back around, and let's say on move, let's set this up correct, of course. On move number 5, they're playing F3. It's slow but solid. We now have time to castle. We then will have choices of which way our pawn structure can go. We can get our knight over to C6, or we can play C6 ourselves, which allows our queen access to the queen side. If we think they're going to castle long, getting our queen over here sometimes can be very helpful. I actually love playing black King's Indian here, King's Indian defense, when they castle long, because then I have no problems trying to just even give away a pawn or two, and just opening up the floodgates on the queen side, attack their king. They're going to come for my king, I attack for their king, sure. And if we still can control this king side, even when they castle long, I'm not so worried about them attacking because we still control it. All right, I have 3 quick games to show with the Saemisch, against the Saemisch idea for white. The Saemisch attack, Saemisch King's Indian idea for white, however they want to call it. But this is the King's Indian defense, and white on move 5 plays f3. I'm not going to go through those whole games. I just want to get to a certain point, move 10, 12, 14, 15, and we'll see how black was doing. So these are 3 of my games that I played. Let's get to the first one. Hold on. All right, game number 1. And again, I'm not necessarily worried about wins and losses or draws and ratings or any of that stuff. We're just talking about the opening, King's Indian defense, and did it help us get a good position? So that usually means we only look at the first 10, 12, 14, 15 moves, approximately. All right, so these 3 games are against the Saemisch. And King's Indian, trying to get my piece of the center by slowing them down. Not necessarily by putting something in the sweet center, by slowing them down and making them work to get the center that white wants. While they do that, I am going to get my king safe and some of my pieces active. And notice, anytime, I'm going to keep saying this in the King's Indian, anytime your opponent plays e4, you really should respond with d6. Don't let them get an easy e5 in, for sure. All right, so here they're playing the Saemisch, f3. And again, they have a lot of choices here. I mean, they can move either bishop to many spots, knight to f3. They really do have a lot of choices here. And we'll see some of the others in other videos. But here, f3. And it's actually a very strong but slow idea for white. I used to play it as white too. Sometimes I still do, just for fun. All right. I castle right away. And let's remove one thing. Hold on. There is an option to have what we call the best move arrow pointing, and sometimes I actually find it distracting. What the computer says is great, and I do use the computer, when I need to, of course. But at the same time, at the computer, we're talking beginners, and what we're thinking of are just ideas. So it's a little annoying to have that arrow sometimes. All right. Didn't mean to explain too much, and let's get moving. So here, white has a lot of choices after black is castled. They played f3. Here, they played bishop d3, which makes sense if they want to play their knight on g2, e2, right? They took away the favorite square of the knight by playing f3 with a pawn. So they could control g4, so I can't attack their bishop to go to e3. Since they played f3, though, I would think the next move most of the time should be something like bishop e3. That's why they're playing f3. But if they want to get their kingside pieces out, and they put their knight first on e2, that makes the light squared bishop very sad. How is it going to get happy for a while? And the knight on e2 is pretty good, right? It does help control the center. And it does have places to move later. They can fight back on f4 if black starts to expand, maybe. But it does make the light squared bishop very unhappy. So this is maybe why this player moved their bishop first. They're aiming at f5, making it harder for me to get f5 later, maybe. But they're getting it out of the way, so now the knight can go to e2 and the bishop's happier. One of the things about the white side of the King's Indian, it is tough when they play e4 and c4 to make their light squared bishop happy. It's just the way it is. They're also trying to make perhaps black's light squared bishop not have a lot of great choices either. So both of those bishops sometimes can be very tough. This is made up for black's side anyway by having this amazing dark squared bishop. But anyway, they played bishop d3, but they could have played knight ge2. Bishop e3, which makes a lot of sense after f3 to play it right away. You could play bishop g5 too, by the way, and this does put a lot of pressure on black. I've had some players play f3 and bishop here, but then I almost wonder why they're really playing f3 initially, because usually that's to help protect the bishop hiding on e3. They could also play bishop f4. By the way, that's very common because it kind of says to black, I'm not going to let you play e5. You could do the c5 side maybe, but I'm not going to let you get your e5 because many players for the King's Indian play the e5 version. All right, and then finally they could just play bishop e2, and I've had this play too. And they try to play knight to h3 and then knight to f2. They dare me to take their knight maybe sometimes. Sometimes they'll play g4 first and then knight will go to f2, and that makes some sense too. G4 and then h4. Now they got their pawn storm coming out the king's side. So there's a lot of options here for black. Some of it's a little slow, but there are options. Anyway, bishop d3. And I hit back in the center, which I normally do with e5. Not that that's the only choice. Again, You could do c5. You can move knight out to a couple places. You can even play a6 now or c6 now. You actually have a lot of choices since white is going very slow. But I usually do try to get my piece to the center somewhere around moves 5, 6, 7 as black. And my favorite way to go usually is with the e5 option. And if they go forward, my knight can go to c5 sometimes. And if they keep it here for the moment, then my knight can go to c6 and help join the pressure in the center. So I like this idea for black. Now, you might say it makes the dark square bishop unhappy. All right. But it actually does a lot of power behind the pawn. And if they lock it up, many times this bishop later can be very useful. All right, but let's keep going here. They decide to jump out of the way of d pawn right away, and now my knight is eyeing c5 as needed, attacking their bishop. I can trade it away if needed. And you know, the knight and your pieces have to go somewhere. The reason why I like the King's Indian system is, you know, defense is that there are good places for all your pieces, as long as you pay attention to where your pieces are going. All right, they played bishop e3 finally. And now I played a5, maybe a move I don't need to play. On this particular moment. Notice, even if I back up, when I played knight bd7, I could actually play knight h5 now. A very common move early on versus the Saemisch setup for white, because everything's on dark squares, and black wants to get in f5 usually as soon as possible. Usually when you get in f5 with your e5, after they play d5, it usually means black is okay, in my opinion. It means black usually is equal because you're controlling the king side. So getting the knight out of the way makes sense, right? But now if we look, h5 is a very active, spicy place, right? It can be attacked, but now you can go forward if you want and let them mess up your pawns, but it doesn't really mess up the pawns too much. Makes your bishop stronger. Your knight has great places to follow up afterwards. And once you move the knight, by the way, this queen is now active too. So if the knight goes to h5 and they attack with an early g4 without thinking, that just allows queen h4 check and they lose castling for nothing. If they get bishop on e3, which is very common and they should do earlier, then they can go over to f2 and block the queen. Notice how that works. So you kind of egging them on to play a little spicy maybe. You say knight h5, but it really opens up your f-pawn, and that's one of the reasons. So I could have done it there. Some people do it. But I like to develop a little bit more of my queen side sometimes. But f5 is very important. Remember that. All right, so they played bishop e3. Now I played a5, and I'm trying to cement this spot for my knight just in case they're not castling long. Just in case. But a5 maybe wasn't necessary right away. Again, I could just play what? Knight h5. Boom. And open this up. And this knight on the queen side is ready to jump to c5 as needed. Or if my knight ends up going to f4 and they trade, I can even go into the center this way. So this is very flexible, very strong. All right. But I did play a5, and they responded with a3. I was a little bit surprised by that, of course, because I don't see the need to do that yet. I know knight c5 is an option. And yes, they do want to chase away with a pawn, but I don't think this structure helps them right now, especially if they want to castle queenside. Doesn't mean they're definitely going to castle queenside, though, just because they play the Saemisch. Many times they go kingside, too. All right, now I did play knight h5. I figured, all right, you've made it windy on your queenside. Now I'm going to start being active on the king side. Where is their king going to go? Because the sooner or later, I'm going to even open up the center. Boom. And that will give me good play against their king if their king stays in the center. All right, so this is very common. I got f5, and I already think black is doing great. And they captured. I captured back. They castled. I played queen h4. And notice, I think the opening already can be considered quite a success. I don't mind getting it windy over here when I'm in control of the king side. My king can tuck away, whoops, once per video. My king can tuck away in h1. I can use the open g line with my heavy pieces, rook and maybe queen if needed at some point. Put some pressure here. This bishop, even though it hasn't moved, later becomes very strong on the king side, even if it doesn't move. That's what I love about the King's Indian. You don't actually have to move the light squared bishop a lot, and later on becomes very much a part of the game. And again, I do have ideas of pawn going forward with the knight going forward maybe. I also have f4 locking this area down, and again, king can go over. So I'm very happy with this position. I think black is doing fine. A couple more moves, they chase my queen. I stay on the g line. Again, they played Another move trying to trade away queens, get rid of my queen, is very active. I said no. And here we're probably just going to kind of slow down and stop and we'll go to the next game. I still think black is doing wonderful. You might even say, hey, Coach Aaron, this f-pawn is pinned. They could play g4, kind of attacking and maybe winning stuff. The bishop is not protecting f5, right? So they could play g4, but it's actually pinned against their king also. So my pin might even be stronger. They could try g4, and I think a very active move like e4, boom, does a lot of good work against them. It opens us up for the knight, attacking all this area. Right now this pawn is pinned, so I have two attackers, right? Not even including the bishop, which is hiding and lurking in the background. If they take, I can take over here. And their king's getting open. Yes, my king might be open too, but I can hide in the corner, and I have many more pieces on the king side controlling the king side. All right, I think this was an opening success. Let's go to game number 2 real quick. All right, game number 2 that I played, and this was, I believe, a draw. But again, I'm not worried about wins, losses, or draws. We just want to talk about the opening versus we're playing the King's Indian, and they played the Saemisch line against the King's Indian. Let's get started with the moves. And again, King's Indian, and as soon as they play e4, we respond with d6. They play f3, solid but slow, I admit, and I've played it many times. I usually castle as soon as I can to get my queen protected in the King's Indian. You don't have to, but I usually like to do that so I can hit with e5 and c5 and not worry about a queen trade. That way, if they take on e5 or c5 and open up the game, and I take back, there's going to be an open D line. So I'm either going to have my queen facing their queen, or if they take, I'm going to have my rook on the open line. And I love this. Just be a little nervous about your c7, right? Because they can try to get an early knight attack on c7 if queens are off the board. But as long as your knight is on b8 and hasn't moved yet, if they go knight b5, you always have knight a6 protecting c7. And if they go to d5, well, you can always remove that attacker if you need to. You can just remove it. But with their pawn on c4, it does block the bishop from reaching, so even knight d5, you can still many times play knight a6 if you don't want to take their knight. And once your knight on a6 is protecting, and their knight's on d5, a little c6 pawn says, hey, knight, what you doing here? Get out of here. All right. But let's get back to this game real quick. And here, this opponent played bishop e3. Can't even talk this morning, sorry. But bishop e3. And to me, this makes the most logical sense after f3. That's why you're playing f3, or at least one of the reasons, to kind of shelter your bishop so they can't annoy your bishop. This bishop is kind of destined for white, if they really work at it, destined to get to h6 and trade. But it takes a lot of work. They're playing f3, then bishop e3, then queen d2, then they have to play bishop to h6, and then they're taking the bishop. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves just to make a fair trade. And yes, it might make it windy over here. But if black has 4, 5 moves while white is doing all this, that should be more than enough compensation for the windiness around the king. That's how I think about it. So, you know, you can't always avoid certain things. You really could work hard to avoid it if you really wanted to. You could play h6 and king h7 and make it harder for the bishop to reach h6. All right, but that doesn't help get your pieces happy and developed. I want to control the center and get my pieces happy and developed. If they're going to spend a lot of moves to do one thing, I say go ahead. All right, so here we have a lot of choices as black, and this is the normal setup for the Saemisch for white. And I play knight c6 many times. It's not the only thing I've played, though. Many times I'll hit with e5 first. I think I did that the very last game, right? But I also like knight c6. And there is the idea of, you have to think here, what if they go forward, right? Free move. Well, our knight actually can now jump into the center. We haven't played e5 yet, so we can put our knight there. And it's very interesting. You have to stay alert with your knights, but black has much more activity here. 1, 2, 3 small pieces already developed, and king has castled. That also counts as development. And the light squared bishop is very happy, controlling a lot of squares just in case. So now the knight's in the center, and we always talk about, can it be attacked by pawns? It can, but if they play f4 early, we already can jump to g4, now we're aiming at this bishop. If they play f4, it kind of defeats the purpose of what they've set up, right? They played f3 to take control of g4, so if they play f4, they're releasing g4. They put their bishop here so they could play queen d2 and bishop e3 and then get to h6. Again, if they play f4, they're blocking their bishop. So it almost goes against what they've been playing. So that's one thing, but they can do it. And you can just play to g4. And if you don't want to play to g4, let's say, ooh, Coach Aaron, that's too far on their side. My knight will get trapped. All right. Well, if they play f4, you just back up, and we have our good old c5. We talk about c5 a lot as a choice. I don't always put my knights there, but having it as a choice during the game is always very good. So if they decide to try to chase their knight and you don't want to play to g4, right, you could just go back to d2 and get over to c5. Nice. Because again, f4 kind of defeats the purpose of why they put the bishop there. And, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So this is very, very solid for black. So I'm kind of like, hey, you want to play d5? Come on, let's go. You want to get your free move in? But my knight gets very active in the center. All right, he actually played queen d2, which makes a lot of sense. And now I play e5. My knight's there to support that. And again, I'm not worried about the necessary trade because that's a lot of moves from white. So I play e5 to get my piece to the center. Now they do a little development, knight g to e2. And I play a6. I'm basically saying, let me prepare the queen side. I'm taking away b5, maybe from the knight, maybe. But more importantly, I'm saying a6, and I'm eyeing the idea that if they castle long, I will play b5 pretty quickly. I don't even care if he loses a pawn, because opening up lines against your opponent's king is worth a pawn in most games, I have to say. All right, so let's get to a little bit more of this game and then get to game 3 real quick. I'm kind of running long on this video, but we want to get these 3 games in. All right, so my opponent went forward after I played a6 and attacked my knight. Knight has a great place to go, e7, and they castle long. Sometimes the player who plays the Saemisch, the f3 line with this nice little pawn chain, they'll use it as cover to castle long and then try to storm you. This is very common. Call it the caveman attack, right? I keep saying that, but it's true. But once they castle long, it also allows me to maybe open up the queen side, get a line open by playing b5. I can still get in f5. Help control the king side. Even though my king's here, I don't mind that because, again, with my bishop, queen, my dark square bishop, 2 knights, and a rook, I have a lot of firepower on the king side. All right, but I got to save my knight. So I went to e7. They castle long. Now I want to get an f5. So once they play d5, I'm also eyeing perhaps going to c5 if needed. But I want to get that f pawn to f5, and I believe that stabilizes black's position. All right, they slide the king over. They could have tried to play it a little more spicy, whoops, and play g4. I still would play f5, believe it or not. All right, so king over. I play f5. Now they played bishop h6, very common, right? They want to perhaps make this trade at the right time, push Harry to h-pawn, open up the line, make that trade with Harry for my g-pawn, h for g, right? And maybe queen and rook, nice battery, very common attack. Black actually has a lot of options here. Now, I decided to play a simple way, and that is simply just to lock down the king side with f4. Separate the communication and protection between the queen and bishop. So after this trade is made, and notice, my bishop is actually not that happy anymore, so I'm good with this trade. Take away my unhappy piece, I don't mind, in this position. And my king will be on a square that's off the back rank. My rook can go back and forth as needed. The king side is kind of locked down. My king can also still hide on h8. I mean, this is very safe because I control the king side. And I keep saying that basically because you have to really believe that. This might be where a lot of the maneuvering is going on, but this is also where you control as black. So instead of a f4, another good choice might have just been to take their bishop. And you only do this if you really see some good things to do. You want to make them spend the turn to take. But if you take here, capture, and now I could have played b5. Start advancing on the queen side. Say to them, hey, what are you going to do? I'm going to advance on the queen side. And if they advance on the king side, well, b4. Now where does the knight go? Let's say it goes to a4, because that's really the only square. Now I open it up a little bit. I control the f line. They take back. And then after my knight going back to f6, yes, it jumped out of the way, so my f-pawn could go forward. Could have gone to c5 at some point, but now it jumps back in this position. It's very strong. Protects h5, right? Threatens to go to g4. That's the reason why I capture here. And my bishop's also protecting it just in case. So on g4, attack the queen. And I'm threatening attacking both rooks with protection on f2. So this would be a nice fork. So I'm threatening attack queen, go to f2, winning at least in exchange. And my pieces are very active. And again, who controls the king side? And yes, they do have these two huge pieces aiming at the king side, maybe. But I have 4 pieces, maybe 5, depending on how you count, to help control that. And this knight is definitely way out of play on the side of the board. All right, I think this would have been an opening success, or was an opening success. I played f4 to kind of lock it down. I could have also taken perhaps their bishop and tried to expand on the queen side. So, King's Indian success. Let's go to game